Right out of college, I had anticipated potentially going back into the military, especially having done ROTC. I was commissioned as an officer, so I started as a private, worked my way up, and then eventually did what's called green to gold, meaning they pinned the officer bars on me, and had considered taking some of my inspirational and leadership charisma onto the battlefield. My MOS, military job specialty, is infantry, and I've been a sniper as well, and a range coach, meaning I've taught others how to shoot significantly well, I would say. But 9/11 happened, and for a short time I was actually a security. That made me a Army, because it was ROTC for the Army is what the college is, just what they had. They ended up asking me to be the commander in charge of a unit that was patrolling the international airport after 9/11, and that was not enough to pay the bills, but it was enough to keep me from able to do anything else. So I picked up a secondary job selling cars, which I thought was going to be very short-lived, and it turned out to be short-lived for reasons other than what I had anticipated. But as they continued to have me patrol, and the war effort started to pick back up, I was being forced to sell cars longer than I had thought, and a gentleman pulled up on the lot, and I sold him a car, and he said, I'm starting a mortgage company. Interest rates are falling, mortgages are doing good, and you've got a phenomenal knack for sales. You'd be a great mortgage broker. So I went and interviewed with him, and he got me a job as a mortgage broker, which was 6 days a week, and you started at 7 and you went till 8. Unless you were hungry, you could stay till midnight and actually follow the timelines as they changed, and it was mostly cold calling for refinances as interest rates continued to fall. And I did phenomenally well by that. Probably, age 23 or 4, I was probably making $15,000 or $20,000 a month, take home, doing that. Of course, I never slept, and I still like to party, so I would still find time to drink in between those hours. Took a toll on my relationship with Lexi, which obviously fortunately she stuck through it, and we outgrew some of those more immature decisions. But I learned a heck of a lot about working. I learned a lot about working with clients. I learned a lot about marketing, networking, and within 6 months, because of my abilities, I was the corner office guy. I had gone through and driven around to other car dealerships and recruited another team, created a successful team of kind of mini-me's or junior mortgage guys, taught them the business. They were all doing quite well and so forth. And I got to a point where I realized that I was on a treadmill, a rat race, that I did not want to continue forever. And I also felt that the relationships I was building were superficial and empty, because the transaction was done and you pretty much moved on. And I thought to myself, back to the music side of me that I wasn't able to get to so much, and the ability or desire to truly impact people's lives has always been there, and the educational side has been there, and I was doing very little of that. And I decided I needed to find a change, but I wasn't sure what it was. So I did a lot of job searches and read a lot of books about figuring out what your parachute is, and Who Moved My Cheese, and all these other books, so I could try to figure out better where my calling was. And I ended up finding a job opportunity with a boutique financial firm that was looking to open a new office and needed somebody with management experience, that had sales experience, that could learn the financial side. And they said if I got all my licenses, I could take over this office, which happened to be in Ocala, which was the same town that my father lived in. So I thought the stars were aligning, and I worked my butt off to get my Series 7 broker's license, and of course the insurance licenses and bonding and all the other things that go with that. And took the leap and started my office in Ocala, doing the financial services, and was still very green, and obviously learning as I went, and attended every seminar and industry meeting, and read everything I possibly could about the industry. And I did very well. I would say 2 reasons. One, my approach even in those days was more educational and more personable. I remember in my office I had taken pictures of all the clients. Every time they became a new client, I'd go show up at their door and I'd give them a pie and I'd take pictures. And I had a full bulletin board of all the clients I had holding their pies. And I'd always send them a survey that said, tell us one thing you like about us. And whatever they did, I'd cut that out and I'd stick that next to their picture. So when people walked into the office at the time, you'd see this entire bulletin board of smiling people saying good things. And, the sale was almost made before we even talked. And then, a little bit of, half hour of personal conversation. And then I'd, ask them what their questions or concerns were, fill out some forms and be done. What I also didn't know is at the time I had it better than I realized. I had teamed up with an attorney who specialized in estate planning, which taught me a heck of a lot about wills, about trust, about tax minimization, about business selling, valuation, succession. And I didn't realize that I was getting an education in life firsthand that many advisors to this day probably don't have, especially from that perspective. He was... I was just close to him as almost a family member, and we were also right a few miles away from a town or a community called the Villages, which at the time, and it still may be, was the largest retirement community in the country. And so people were selling their home up north for considerable amount of money and buying these cheap retirement homes, having a big check in hand, needing to do their estate, review their taxes, and roll over their investments into IRAs and so forth. And lo and behold, find that the first people you see happen to be our little office right outside the gate of your community. And I did not realize it was almost fish in a barrel for what we do. And we had I had an approach that was personable, and he had an experience that was just unmatched. And looking back, we had a great thing. Unfortunately, he was actually shot and killed. Specifically, let me take that back. He committed suicide with a shotgun. Yeah. So he's not no longer around. Obviously, he had some demons of his own behind the scenes, of course. But one of the things that happened right around that same time, which took a lot of the wind out of me, I got a call from my mom that she was having problems, and it started with the fact that she had a multitude of overlapping problems at the same time, including a stroke, which also caused her to have an accident where she ended up dislocating her neck, where she was then disabled and forced into retirement. Did not know how to fill out the paperwork properly, tried to do it on her own, and was denied disability, so she had no income. It was before she was old enough to get retirement, and she didn't know how to do anything, and had a lot of medical bills piling up. And after a little bit of research and flying back and forth, realizing that she was upside down in her house and would have lost her house, and was refinancing her house to pay for bills that she could not afford. So it was kind of robbing from Peter to pay Paul. And it was not a pretty situation. So I told my wife that I needed to do something, and I didn't know what it was. And at the time, I felt like I was almost getting tired of helping people, and then seeing things happen. And I said, we're going to move. And I picked up the house, put the house that we had in Florida on the market, and moved back up to Maryland, where I moved into the townhouse that my mom had finally grown into, she was about to lose, and sold off the business that I had in Florida and took everything I had left from that to pay off her bills, get her situated, and pay off the balance on the townhouse so it wasn't lost, and then put money back into it, because as you can imagine, it wasn't upkept very well. Put a lot of money back into that, and then in about a 6-month period of time was able to then sell the townhome and buy a more appropriate home for my wife, who was now pregnant, and my mom, who needed to live with somebody. And that's what we did. So it didn't take long before couple things caught up with me. For one, I had a house on the market in Florida, and of course, that same time period, about 2008, was the time that maybe 2007 or so, the market really bottomed out in real estate, and the house ended up taking a loss for $68,000, which I didn't have anymore because I had spent everything I had on fixing my mom's situation, and that wasn't pretty. It took me 4 or 5 years to recover from that, and in doing so, my wife was pregnant, had my daughter, and actually got pregnant with an Irish twin. Exactly 12 months later, I then had my second. So I had a new home and had a wife, one baby, and one on the way, and did not any longer have the income that I once had, and had a house in Florida that I took a loss on, and a new house that I could hardly maintain. So I decided I needed to take a salary job, and based on my pedigree, I was offered a salary job for a national corporation offering retirement planning advice specifically to employees, mostly of the local hospital, Johns Hopkins, as well as the school system, Harford County school system. So it was mostly teachers, doctors, and hospital staff, and they wanted me to provide education, and very quickly I learned that no one was absorbing the education as it was given to me to teach, and I created a whole new curriculum, which also had a series of seminars that I taught, almost one a day at different locations for the hospital as well as around the different schools, and I was the traveling seminar giver for retirement. Again, it was a salary job, and because it was advice only, I'd see these people, I'd answer a lot of great questions, and then they would leave. Oftentimes, they'd call me later on my cell phone and ask for additional advice or how to implement it, which I couldn't help them do because I was being paid just to provide the education. And it was a salary, not enough to ever sustain the lifestyle that I had intended and promised myself I would provide for my family. So it didn't take long before I realized I needed to get back into the financial world, but I wanted to try to bring with me the lessons that I've learned. And after interviewing a lot, I got hired as a commission broker again, so I had more potential upside for a large firm. And typically, I don't publicize it, but as you probably know by now, I was working for Merrill Lynch. And over the course of that time period, started doing considerably well again. I actually won an award every year, first as the top rookie, and then as the fastest growing, and then as the top producer for the region, and then finally as the top producer for the East Coast. And so I was doing quite well at that, and it was interesting because year two they actually asked me if I would create a training curriculum to teach the other advisors how to do what it was that I do, and I did create that, and I started teaching that. But I'll fast forward to the issues that I grew into. Was that in looking at my own life and in looking at all the things that I had been through and the experiences that I knew, including the estate planning and the tax planning that I've done considerable hundreds of times for clients in Florida, and the thousands of people I've helped answer questions for in my salaried position. I was struggling because at Merrill Lynch, everything was transactionally driven. You meet with somebody, you fill out paperwork, and then you sell mutual funds or annuities or stocks or bonds, and then they call for the review, and the review would start with, well, let me look at your statement, I'll tell you what's wrong with it, we'll fix it by buying or selling new stocks, bonds, mutual funds, or annuities, and you make commissions and so forth. But there's huge holes in those plans. They don't really address taxes, they don't address business succession, they don't address truly, planning. They don't address legacy needs. They don't address basically anything other than, well, if you buy a good investment and it goes up, you'll do well. If it goes down, please don't call and yell at me, because then I'm going to sell you another one. Hopefully that one will go up. I guess the trigger that finally hit that was last year. My father Actually, let me back up. 2 years ago, my father and his new wife, my stepmother, were both diagnosed with cancer. They both were undergoing chemo at the same time. Um, they both beat it. Unfortunately, within a month of them beating it, my stepmother, due to the treatment, ended up having a blood clot that went through her system, and it killed her over a cup of coffee. And um, that devastated my father, and it put a lot of perspective on his life, that life was short and it needed to be meaningful. And he had always told me the object of the game, no matter what you do, is to win. And he finally changed that, and he said that the object of life is to enjoy it. And that changed at that time. And I remember sitting on the beach in Florida where we were sprinkling her ashes and going over, enjoying life. And I had mentioned to him that probably for 10 years now, other than a few moments, I had not enjoyed life, because it had always been about winning, being the best salesman, working longer hours. And now that I had 2 kids and a house full, including a mother that I'm partially taking care of physically as well as financially, that it becomes, the little things become much more important. So now, a year after that, he's diagnosed again with cancer, and they said the treatment he would have to undergo would be considerable, and would not be enjoyable, and it still might not work. And he said he would rather enjoy life than fight it, and decided not to do anything. And he started going through his bucket list, and in helping him do that, I found an organization called Wish of a Lifetime that I got close to, which helps do just that. It helps people fulfill their bucket list, and we've done over 200 wishes. You've got some of the links to some of those sites and so forth. And you know, my perspective on a lot of things have changed between the 2 kids, between my dad, between the Wish of a Lifetime. And I found a good mentor that told me it was time I brought music back into my life, because it was the passion or the light inside of me, and it was time that I found a way to use that along with everything I have to change the world the way that I want it changed. And that means able to provide not just the education that people need, but in a way that's comfortable, in a way they can relate to, and then being able to help actually implement that in a process that they're comfortable with, that changes their life, as well as multi-generationally changes their children and their children's children. And if the means are there, potentially leaves a legacy that impacts other causes as well, that might be important to them, just as things like the scholarship I created in my family's namesake and so forth are to us. So that's kind of what brought me to where we're at now. So that is, wow, I guess that's a lot. That was 5 and 6. That was the move, as well as the change, which is kind of the things that I've been going through. So that's it.